Bethany Vance crossed the gravel of Ashworth Hall's forecourt at a measured walk, and before her uncle's carriage had finished rocking on its springs, she had already decided to ruin herself that night. Her slippers bit the crushed stone. Her gloves, still creased from 3 days of travel, were the wrong shade of cream for a selection week, and she was glad of it. Somewhere behind the tall, clipped yews, a groom was whistling something unsuited to the gravity of the occasion, and Bethany, who had been silent since the Welsh border, smiled for the first time in 40 miles. Her uncle hissed his instructions through the open carriage door, his voice the dry rattle of ledger pages. Lord Ashworth, she was to remember, did not care for forwardness. She would be demure. She would be flattered. She would secure him, or they would lose Heronbrook by Michaelmas. "I heard you the first 11 times, Uncle." She did not look back. She walked on into the long shadow the west wing threw across the drive, and when her maid skidded to keep up, Bethany lowered her voice and asked Ellen to tell her if she ever threaded a needle with her teeth between now and Saturday, so that she could stop. Ellen only said, "Miss," in the dry tone of a woman who had given up arguing. The house rose out of the summer haze like a thing dreamed by a man with too much money and insufficient sleep. 4 stories of honey-coloured stone, a pediment crowded with weathered gods, and 1,000 windows that had all caught the late sun at once and now blazed as though something inside were burning. Bethany counted the windows because it was easier than counting the reasons she was there. 63 on the south face, 14 on the gable. Enough to watch from. At the top of the steps, a butler, older than her uncle's opinions, inclined his head and said, "Miss Vance, His Grace's steward has asked that you be shown to the Blue Suite. Dinner is at 8. "His Grace is here?" "His Grace is unwell. His son, the Honourable Lord Ashworth, is presently in residence." "Is he at dinner?" The butler's eyes flickered, and a single muscle at the corner of his mouth performed the smallest possible calculation before he answered. "Lord Ashworth has been detained on estate business. He regrets he cannot attend this evening." "How convenient for him," Bethany said, and the butler's mouth did the tiny thing again, the thing that was not quite a smile, but was certainly not nothing. She filed it away without knowing yet what file it belonged in. She did not change for dinner. She sat at a table of 11 candidates. 11 women, her uncle called them. 11 horses, she called them in the privacy of her skull. And drank the soup, and cut the fish, and watched a cousin of Lord Ashworth's named Francis hold court at the head of the table in his lord's absence. Francis was thin and sharp-featured, and wore an embroidered waistcoat that had been made for a slightly different man. He laughed too often. He laughed now at something the Countess of Malmot's youngest daughter had said about a dog, and the laugh scraped against the inside of Bethany's ears like a spoon over a cracked saucer. At 9:22, she excused herself on account of travel fatigue, and, with her slippers in her left hand and a candle burned low in her right, walked the back corridor of the east wing until the air changed. Stone stopped smelling of beeswax and began smelling of hay. A door under a low lintel. Another door wedged with a brick. Then the yard. The stable yard at Ashworth Hall in July smelled of cut grass, old leather, warm manure, and something faintly sweet she could not name. Some flower forced out of the kitchen garden wall. A single lantern swung from a hook beside the loose box door. Under it, a man with his back to her was running a currycomb down the shoulder of a black gelding the size of a small outbuilding. And as he worked, he was speaking quietly to the horse. Not crooning, not babying. Arguing, in fact, in the tone of a man who had been losing the same argument for years. The gelding, he was explaining, would eat the bran. The gelding would pretend to like the bran. The gelding would not bite Henry again. Henry was a child with aspirations, he told the horse, and the horse had crushed 3 of Henry's dreams that week alone. Bethany's slipper made no sound on the swept brick. She stopped inside the pool of light. "Which dreams?" she said. He did not jump. That was the first thing she noticed. A stranger's voice in a stable yard at 9:30 on a July evening, and he did not turn quickly. He finished the stroke of the comb, set it on the edge of the box, and turned only as far as he needed to see her. He was very tall. His shirt sleeves were rolled to the elbow. His forearms, dusted with the fine black dust that comes off a horse's coat in summer, were the forearms of a man who worked. His hair, dark and cut slightly shorter than was fashionable, was damp at the temples. The pool of lantern light caught the line of his jaw, and the jaw had not been shaved since morning. "The dream of being left alone with his porridge," he said. "Mallory eats it. Mallory eats it in front of Henry. Henry weeps." "A tragedy." "Daily." She stepped closer. The gelding's ear swiveled at her. The man's did not. "Are you Caleb?" "I am. How did you know?" "The house steward told the butler, told a footman, told the girl who lit my candle. I wanted a walk. I was told the stables were the most private corner of the estate after dark, provided one did not mind Caleb." She lifted the candle, which was guttering, and looked at him properly. His boots were too fine. They were the kind of boots a man wore when he rode a great deal and cared that the leather was good. She noted it and said nothing. "And do you?" he said. "Mind?" "Not yet." He half smiled. It was a careful half, the kind of half smile that a man practices in front of a mirror and then forgets he is doing. The lantern light picked out a smudge of black dust on his cheek, where he had pushed hair out of his eyes. "You're one of the candidates." "I am a horse," she said, "on display for a man who cannot be bothered to attend his own auction." He laid the flat of one palm on the gelding's shoulder and left it there, as if to steady something. "He is unwell." "Is he?" "The Duke, I mean, His Grace." "I am well aware of which he you meant." She set the candle on the top of a post and folded her arms. The yard was warm. The air had weight. Somewhere in the paddock a fox barked twice, and the gelding lifted his head and set it back down. From the scullery, far off, came the low clatter of a copper being scoured, and the smell of the honeysuckle over the kitchen wall came in on a breath of wind and went again. "Tell me, Caleb, if you were standing where I am standing, and you had been told for 11 weeks that the roof over your mother's grave depended on your securing a man who could not trouble himself to sit to supper with you, what would you do?" A pause. He pulled a long stem of straw from the edge of the box and turned it between his fingers, slowly, before he answered. "I would leave." "I cannot leave." "Then I would make it impossible to be chosen." She looked at him. He looked back. The lantern creaked on its hook, and somewhere in the loft above them a barn cat moved and settled, a small shift of weight in the warm dark. She asked him then if he knew what the punishment was for a gentleman's daughter who kissed a stable hand the night before selection week. He considered her. He did not step back. The gelding sighed, the enormous sigh of a horse resigned to watching its person make a mistake. The straw went still between his fingers. "She was sent home," he said, "her family shamed, the candidacy dissolved, and the stable hand dismissed without reference. Would you object very much?" His thumb passed once over the end of the straw, then broke it. "To being kissed, or to being dismissed?" His mouth did the small, careful thing she had first seen on the butler. She understood now it was a family tic, and she did not let herself understand anything else. He found, he added, that he objected to very few things in principle. She crossed the last of the brick. She set one hand on his shoulder, broad, hard under the linen, warmer than the night, and she kissed him. She had expected surprise, and she got surprise, but only for the length of a heartbeat. His hand came up to the small of her back, as though he had already been reaching, and had merely forgotten until now that his arm existed. He tasted of the end of a long day, water, wind, something faintly like apples. His jaw was rough under her palm. When she drew back, His eyes were very dark in the lantern light, and he was not laughing. "I have," he said, "some follow-up questions." "Tomorrow." She gave him her name, Bethany Vance, and she was already stepping back. Her slippers were still in her left hand. "Ruinous," she told him. "Utterly." He was to ring it in the morning, be shocked when they told him, and above all, not apologize. She had chosen him on purpose. The purpose was her own. She turned. She walked out of the yard on bare feet, with a guttering candle and her slippers dangling by their ribbons, and she did not look back. Because if she had looked back, she would have seen the stable boy put his hand flat against the flank of the enormous black gelding and exhale, as though he had been holding his breath for a month. Behind her, very softly, she heard him say to the horse, "Mallory, Mallory, what have we done?" At 2 the next morning, Bethany lay on her back in the blue suite and listened to the house settle around her. The moon cut a pale bar across the counterpane. Her fingers, on the coverlet, were still trembling. Not with fear, she cheerfully diagnosed, but with the jittery surplus of a decision she had been building toward since February. She had burned it. The house, the selection, the candidacy, the future her uncle had laid out for her like a place-setting. Ashes now. By sunrise, Ellen would be weeping. By breakfast, the housekeeper would know. By luncheon, her uncle would be in the carriage, screaming. She should have felt terror. Instead, she kept thinking about the particular way a man had said, "Mallory, what have we done?" The man who had said it had not moved like a stable hand. He had not tasted like one either. She had kissed a groom in Shropshire once, at 14, on a dare, on principle, and it had been like kissing a radish. This had been nothing like a radish. This had been like kissing a sentence she did not yet know how to finish. She turned her face into the pillow and made herself list the odd things. The boots. The forearms, which were not a groom's forearms. Grooms were wiry and hard in a different way. This one had been broad across the shoulders, the way men are who ride and fence and lift, and have been doing all three since boyhood. The voice, which had argued with a horse in the cadence of a man who had been educated in how to argue, the way the horse had obeyed him in the way horses obey their owners, not their handlers. The small, careful half-smile that was the butler's half-smile. The fact that the butler, when she had asked about Lord Ashworth, had made that same mouth. She sat up. She said no to the canopy, and then no, Bethany, like a tutor addressing an unruly pupil. She would not. She would not even entertain it. She had made a choice. She would stand by her choice. She lay down again. She did not sleep until 5. At 11, she went back to the stables. She had told herself it was to pay off the stable boy, so that he would not be punished. She had a purse of her mother's rings. She would put them in his hand. She would swear him to silence. That was her reason. She told it to herself in the corridor. She told it to herself on the stairs. By the time she crossed the gravel, she had stopped lying. He was forking hay out of the loft onto a barrow below. His shirt was clean. His boots were still too fine. When he saw her, he set the fork in the hay and came down the ladder without hurry. "Miss Vance." "Caleb." "You came back." "Apparently." A silence. The gelding, Mallory, was watching them both over the top of the loose box with the expression of a chaperone who has decided to pretend to be asleep. Late morning light came in slantwise through the upper door of the hayloft and lit the floating moats above them. The yard smelled of clean straw and the warm, sweet salt of a horse that had been worked an hour ago and sponged down. She asked him if he was in trouble. He said no. She shifted her weight, the gravel giving under the silk slipper she had chosen, on purpose, for its impracticality, and asked if she was. "Not yet," he said. He had told no one. He would not tell anyone. She exhaled. She had not known until that moment that she had been holding her breath. The air went out of her in a long, quiet line. And with it, something in the small muscles at the back of her neck let go that had been held since the carriage. Why not? He considered the question. He leaned his shoulder against the stall post and crossed his ankles. His boots were cleaner today. The leather was definitely too fine. "Because," he said, "I would like to understand you first, before I let anyone else tell me what you were doing." "That," she said, "was not the answer I expected from a stable hand." "What did you expect?" "Either, 'Thank you for the kiss, miss,' or 'Please don't have me flogged, miss.'" "I am disappointingly literate." He smiled at the dust on the toe of his boot. It was the smile of a man who found himself in a conversation he had not rehearsed for, and was discovering he enjoyed. "Miss Vance, call me Bethany. It is ridiculous for you to call me anything else. I kissed you." "Bethany, why did you do it?" She opened her mouth to say it was to ruin her candidacy, because that was the answer she had prepared in her bedroom at 3 in the morning. She closed it again, because the answer had changed, and she was not yet willing to know by how much. She had needed, she said, carefully, to make a decision that no one else could unmake. She had been made very small by other people's choices for a long time. "And now you are large. Now I am unmarriageable." "Is that the same thing?" "In the society in which I have the misfortune to move, yes." He nodded slowly. He did not look sorry for her. That was, she thought, the second thing about him that was not what she had expected. A stable boy would have looked either avid or pitying. This one looked thoughtful, the way an engineer looks at a structure he is deciding whether to save. "Ride with me," he said. "At dawn tomorrow," he said. He picked up the fork he had set aside and rested the tines against the ground, one hand on the worn, smooth shaft. The handle, she saw, had been worn to the shape of a palm that was not his. An older palm, a longer used one. Mallory wanted a gallop, and he could not trust the stable lad with him. She could ride, he hoped, astride if she must. He was almost smiling now. She could hear it before she could see it. She was, he told her, to borrow a pair of breeches from the head groom's wife. She was Bethany's height, he said, and had a sense of humor. They would be out and back before the house was up. No one would see her. And he would tell her, if she liked, why he was also ruining himself. A swift, unworthy hope went through her at the word "also," and she pushed it down before it could show on her face. "Are you also ruining yourself?" "I have been," he said. "Ruining myself for 6 months. Tomorrow at 5. Come if you're bored, stay if you're not." She came. The sky above the Ashworth paddock at 4:50 on the 5th morning of July was the exact color of the inside of a mussel shell. Dew soaked the hem of the breeches the head groom's wife had silently pressed into her hands. Mallory stood like a storm on 4 legs in the yard. Caleb. She kept calling him Caleb in her head, even after she had begun to suspect it was not entirely the whole of his name, cupped his hands for her knee and threw her up into the saddle with the practiced ease of a man who had done this for women since he was a child. "He pulls left," he said. "Indulge him. I pull right. Try not to lose me." They went up the rise behind the orchard at a canter, and when the canter fell naturally into a gallop, Bethany laughed aloud, for the first time since February, because the morning was cold on her teeth and the horse under her was an enormous willing engine, and beside her, a man she had ruined herself for was matching her stride for stride, on a grey, half a hand shorter than hers, and he was grinning. They pulled up at the top of the long meadow. The house lay below them, half dissolved in river mist. The sun had come over the eastern wood and was turning the dew to gold. "Why," she said, winded, "are you ruining yourself?" "Because my father," he said, "signed a paper he should not have signed, and I have been trying to unsign it." "What kind of paper?" Mallory ducked his head and pulled at the rein. then settled. Caleb's gloved hand rose and fell against the grey's neck beside him, the small, automatic rhythm of a man who had reassured a horse 1,000 times. "A marriage contract," he said. Not his by name, but his by Heir. He was to marry a woman he had met twice in his life, because her father was owed a favor by his, and the favor was him. "That is common, I know. I was going to say barbaric." He looked at her. The sun was behind him. She could not read his face clearly, but she heard the smile in his voice, and she saw the way his free hand, resting on his thigh, curled a fraction and opened again. "I like you, Bethany Vance," he said. Something absurd rose in her chest at that, and she chose to address it to the horizon instead of to him. The meadow below was cut in half by a thread of mist. A single heron stood in it as though posed. "You should not." "Tell that to me, not to yourself." She asked who the woman was. He said she had nothing to do with her. Bethany answered that the woman had everything to do with her if he was bound to her. He was working to be unbound, he said. Legally, quietly, slowly. There were 3 clauses, and only one was tractable, and it required the cooperation of a man who did not want to cooperate. She let that sit a moment. A pigeon broke out of the wood behind them, clapped its wings twice, and flew low across the pasture toward the hall. "What is your part in the estate?" The pause before he answered was the size of a breath, and she catalogued it. She also catalogued the small tightening at the corner of his jaw, and the way his gloved hand stilled on the rein. He helped to run it, he said, for his father, in the stables, and in the library when he was needed, more often than he would like. They rode back in silence that was not uncomfortable. Mallory dropped his head. Bethany felt the breeches warm against her skin, and could not remember when last she had been warm in her own body, rather than cold in a drawing room. As they came into the yard, the head groom's wife appeared from the kitchen door, with 2 cups of something hot in her hands, and she did not look at Bethany strangely. She looked at Bethany as though she had been expected. Bethany thanked her for the breeches. They were hers for the week, Mrs. Willoughby said, as long as she needed them. Her eyes flicked to Caleb and back. Bethany put 2 more items in the file. Item: the head groom's wife treated Caleb as though he were slightly above her, not slightly below. Item: the head groom's wife knew Bethany's name without having been told it. By the end of that week, the file was full. It was not a file she wanted to read. It was a file that made her head hurt. So she left the file closed and rode out with him every morning and helped him muck a stall one afternoon. Why on earth? Because you said you wanted to do a thing no one would believe you had done, and I am short a hand, and these are answerable to the fork. Caleb, I am in a linen day gown. Then you will have a story to tell about this day gown. And she had laughed, a proper laugh from the belly, and he had looked at her over the fork handle, as though he had never seen a woman laugh before, and did not yet know what to do with the information. On Thursday evening, she was compelled by her uncle to attend the formal reception at which Lord Ashworth was at last scheduled to appear. She wore rose silk. She sat between the Countess of Malmot's youngest daughter and a girl from Bath whose name she kept forgetting. Lord Ashworth, when he entered, was thin and sharp-featured. He wore the embroidered waistcoat that did not quite fit. He was Francis. Bethany felt the small, blunt shock of a piece of furniture turning out to be a wall. She watched him take the seat at the head of the room. She watched him be addressed as "my lord" by a footman, and she watched the footman's eyes flicker. The same flicker the butler's eyes had done, the same half motion of the lip. And she understood that she was being shown a performance. And she understood that everyone in the room who had served the house for more than a year knew it was a performance. She did not laugh. She did not frown. She had learned, from her uncle, the immense social utility of making her face into a smooth, fresh sheet of paper. When Francis, Lord Ashworth, came down the receiving line and took her gloved hand in his gloved hand and bowed over it and said, Miss Vance, I am delighted. She smiled at him with the full upper half of her face and said, My lord, I regret that I shall not be able to accept your hand. Something in the room went still. Francis's mouth opened, closed, opened again. Miss Vance, I beg your pardon. I have given the matter every consideration. I cannot accept a union. I beg you will not insist. The selection week is not concluded. My decision is. She curtsied. She kept her voice gentle. Her uncle, across the room, had just noticed that she was speaking to Lord Ashworth. His glass was on the way to his mouth. The glass stopped in mid-air. Please convey my respects to His Grace. I shall not be a candidate. She turned away before Francis could answer. She walked the length of the drawing room with her shoulders square and her gloves still buttoned, and she felt as though she were wading through waist-deep water. Behind her, somebody coughed. Behind her, somebody began a very careful sentence about the weather. She reached the double doors. She went through them. She did not run until she had turned the corner of the corridor. She ran to the stables. He was there. He always seemed to be there. He was in a shirt with the sleeves rolled, standing with one hand flat on Mallory's nose. Caleb. He turned. Caleb. Francis. Lord Ashworth, who was presented to me tonight. He is not you. He went very still. It was the same stillness as on the first evening, when a strange voice had come into his yard. A man who did not jump. Bethany. Tell me you do not know what I am talking about. Tell me. He could not. He looked at her and did not lie, and she took one full step backward, because she suddenly could not bear for him to be within reach of her hand. The gravel shifted under her heel. A lantern guttered in its bracket above the loose box door, and the shadow of the gelding moved across the plank wall behind him. Who are you? Bethany, come inside. No! Here! Now! In this yard! Who are you? I will explain every word of it, but I cannot do it here, and I cannot do it in 4 sentences, and I am asking you. Later? She was laughing, and the laugh was dreadful, the sound of something breaking under its own weight. You are asking me to wait, to find out who I have been kissing. Caleb, is that even your name? It is one of my names. She made a small sound in the back of her throat. Her left hand, she noticed from a great distance, had come up to her own collarbone and was pressing there as though to keep something inside it. Oh, she said. Oh, very well done, my lord. He closed his eyes for a breath. When he opened them again, she saw, with a cold little shock, that he looked older than he had looked an hour ago. Bethany, is the marriage contract real? Yes. Are you the Lord Ashworth I was presented to? No. I'm the Lord Ashworth your uncle was trying to sell you to. Francis is a cousin. He is buying me time to tear the contract up before I am forced to sign it. She stood in the yard in her rose silk with her slippers soaked through with dew, and she did not know, in that instant, whether she wanted to strike him with the flat of her hand or walk straight back to the ballroom and strike Francis. She thought she would probably choose Francis, because Francis had bowed over her hand with a mouth she had kissed the night before. No, that had not been Francis. That had been this one, this tall one, this liar. I need, she said, to not be in this yard. Bethany, I need to be alone. I'm going to take your horse. If you stop me, I will scream loud enough to wake this county. Do not stop me. He did not stop her. She took Mallory. She took him in her rose silk, astride, with the skirts bunched around her thighs like a shaming rag. She went up the long meadow at a gallop in the full moon. Mallory carried her as though he knew. She did not cry, because the wind would not let her, and by the time she pulled up at the top of the rise, she was not crying anyway. She was thinking. She thought for 20 minutes. The horse cropped grass. She sat with her fists on her thighs and her hair in her eyes. She thought, he had not lied about why. She thought, he had lied about who. She thought, I kissed him because I wanted to set fire to the life other people were arranging for me. And he was kissed because he was also trying to set fire to a life other people were arranging for him. And if we had met in an honest yard, we would have understood each other in 5 minutes. She thought, he let me do it. He knew who I was. He let me throw my candidacy away for him without telling me he was the candidacy. That was the unforgivable part. Not that he was Lord Ashworth, that he had not trusted her with the knowledge. She thought about what she would say. She thought about whether she would say it. She thought, most usefully, about what would be most damaging to her uncle, and to this man, and to the cousin in the waistcoat, if she made certain choices in the next 48 hours. She rode back at a walk. She put Mallory in his box herself. She went up the service stair in her damp silk and dirty breeches of dew, and she did not go to the stable yard for 2 full days. On the second day, Lord Thorne arrived. She heard him before she saw him. His carriage came up the drive at the hour the post came, and the gravel broke under the wheels with the loud, self-satisfied crunch of a man who intended to be heard. By the time Bethany had crossed the landing to the long window on the stairs, a footman had already taken a trunk from the box, and a second man in black was being handed down by a groom, and she knew, from the way the butler was already at the door, that this was not a social call. She was in the library with Francis within the hour. She had requested the meeting. Francis had come because he had been sent. He was eating a plum with the care of a man trying to look as though he were not nervous. She asked his surname. Carmichael, he said. Francis Carmichael. His cousin, yes, they had already established. She leaned forward over the library desk. The summer sun came through the tall window at her back and made a hard line across the inlaid wood. The library smelled of old leather binding, beeswax polish, and the faint, peppery dust that came off books nobody had opened in a decade. Who is Lord Thorne? Francis swallowed his plum stone with visible effort. His cravat, she noted, had been tied by a man in a hurry. Ah, Francis cleared his throat. He was the father of the promised bride, he said, the political ally. He had arrived because Ashworth had been... Francis did a small, doomed, apologetic gesture with the plum, and a pip dropped onto the rim of his plate with a tiny porcelain click. Evasive. And was now suspected of evasion. She let the silence do a moment of work, then set both palms flat on the green leather desktop. Tell Lord Ashworth, she did not use the other name, she would not, that I require his presence in this room within the hour. Miss Vance, you... Francis. She looked at him. He set the plum on a plate and did not pick it up again. A fly, having blundered in through the open casement, circled the plum once and went out. I kissed you in that receiving line. Everyone saw me refuse you. Within 48 hours the county will know. You have 2 choices. You help me and I help you, and between us we tear Thorne's face off. Or you continue this ridiculous charade, and I burn your cousin's reputation to the foundation stone. Choose. Francis went away to fetch him. The library door closed behind him with a soft, expensive click. He came. He did not come in stable dress. He came in a coat that fit him the way coats fit men who could afford their tailors, and boots that were still the 2 fine boots from the yard. And he came alone, which was the only part of his entrance she had to forgive him for, because he did not bring anyone to hide behind. He shut the library door. He did not sit. Bethany. Lord Ashworth? That is fair. It is accurate. Yes. Sit down. He sat. The chair creaked once under him. He did not adjust his coat or his cuffs, and she noted that, too. A man who had decided in the corridor what this would look like, and had stopped fidgeting before he reached the door. She leaned back in the chair her uncle had sat in for 3 wasted hours that morning, and she let the silence do the first 2 minutes of the work. A clock, somewhere down the long corridor of the East Wing, chimed the 3 quarters. The sound traveled to them softened by 3 closed doors. "You let me choose you," she said. "You let me throw my future away for a fiction. You knew, when I kissed you, who I was. You did not tell me." "Yes. Yes. No." "Defend yourself." "I have no defense." "Find one." He opened his hands on his knees. They were the same hands. The calluses were the same. The forearm was the same forearm that had been dusted with horse dust on the first evening. She made herself look at them. She made herself remember that the hands were true, and only the name had been false. He told her then about the 3-hour meeting with his father's solicitor that had preceded their first encounter, the 4 weeks he had been given to marry Thorne's daughter, or forfeit the estate on technicalities the late Duke had inserted into the settlement in his final months. He had come out to the yard, he said, because he brushed the horse when he wished to stop thinking. He had not been thinking. He had been arguing with Mallory about Bran, as she had heard. And then, "A stranger kissed you." A stranger, he said, had told him, before she kissed him, that she intended to make herself impossible to be chosen. His voice cracked, very slightly, on the word chosen. It had been the first good news he had heard in a year. "Go on." He had not told her who he was, he said, because he had not known who she was. He had thought her a candidate. He had thought she would be gone in a week. He had thought he could protect her by leaving her in her story, because her story had been the cleaner one. He had been wrong. He said the word wrong very slowly, as if paying for each syllable. "I am sorry." "That is not a defense." "No, it is an apology. I'm aware of the difference." She stood up. She took 3 steps. She picked up the heaviest volume off the library table. It was Hooker, he noted, his father's copy, and she threw it at his head. He ducked. It cracked against the paneling behind him. "Better," she said. "Get out." He got up. "Not the house," she said. "The room. Get out of the room. And send Francis." He got out. 2 days she did not speak to him. 2 days she read. She read in the library, through the morning and into the afternoon, sitting deliberately in the chair his father had used, because if she was going to do the thing she was considering doing, she needed to understand the estate first. She read settlements. She read tenancy rolls. She read 3 years of correspondence from a man named Thorne, whose handwriting sloped backward and whose language leaned on phrases like, "My understanding was," and "It was, of course, agreed." On the afternoon of the second day, she found what she was looking for. It was in a letter dated the March before last, and it was a paragraph which, read aloud, committed Lord Thorne to a sum of money he had not paid for a parcel of land he had already sold back, and it referred to a signed receipt from the late Duke, which, by the date of a separate letter she had found the previous hour, the late Duke had been physically incapable of signing, owing to a broken right hand. She found a similar forgery in her uncle's correspondence with Thorne. She had copied both into her notebook by the time the library clock struck 4. She went to find him. He was in the estate office. He had ink on his cuff. He looked up and did not speak. "I have a proposal," she said. "Is it a book? I would like to duck this time." She told him not to make jokes, not yet, not until she said he could. He nodded. She set the notebook on the desk. She opened it to the first page. She slid it across. The desk was a slab of mahogany older than either of them, and had the deep glow of a surface polished by generations of forearms. A ledger lay open at his elbow, ink drying on the last figure. She laid it out, then, in the flat, dry voice of a woman reading a list. Thorne had been forging his father's signature. Not on the marriage settlement, on land transactions that predated it. He had been cheating his father for at least 2 years. Her own uncle, she said, had been helping him. She had a second notebook that proved it in a different hand. Both would stand up in any court in which an honest judge sat. He read. He read slowly. His jaw did the thing. A small ink stain had dried on the side of his thumb, she saw. He had been working since breakfast. Bethany. Here was the proposal, she said, and she laid that out too. On Saturday night, at his summer ball, which she knew was still to be held, because she had heard the housekeeper arguing about candles, he would publicly denounce Thorne with this evidence, and she would publicly denounce her uncle with that one. Side by side. Together. Not as a couple. As two people who had independently arrived at the same conclusion, which was that these two men had been stealing from everyone in this house for years. He was asking her, he said, to help her burn her own uncle. She was asking him to stand next to her while she burned him, she answered. She would light the match herself. And afterwards, she added, the two of them would have a separate conversation, in which he would not do any of the talking for the first 20 minutes. That conversation was not today. He agreed. She closed the notebook. She slid it back across the desk toward herself. She kept it. The leather of the cover was warm from where her palm had rested on it. He would have copies by tomorrow morning, she said. Francis would make them. Francis owed her. He looked up from the desk, the faintest curve beginning at the corner of his mouth and refusing to finish. Francis owes you what, exactly? A plum. She walked out. Behind her she heard him breathe once. Not a laugh, but the small, quick sound a man makes when a laugh has been very narrowly averted. They worked together for the next 3 days, in a way she had not worked with anyone in her life. They did not touch. They did not flirt. They did not even properly speak, beyond the necessary communication of dates, names, and amounts. She sat on one side of the long oak table in the estate office, and he sat on the other. And between them, Francis, much chastened, less foppish, a surprisingly careful copyist, produced clean copies of 4 documents in a hand that could pass for a clerk's. The sun moved across the floor. Tea came. Tea went. Once, on the second afternoon, he passed her a sharpened pen without looking up, and their fingers touched for less than half a second. And she did not jerk her hand away, and he did not press. And that was the full measure of the day. On the third night, she stopped him at the door of the office. The corridor outside was half lit by a single branch of candles on a side table, and the wax had begun to shape itself into small white tears that would not fall until morning. One thing, she said. If this went badly on Saturday, if Thorne had something they had not found, if the room turned, she would not be saved from it. Her hand was on the doorframe. The wood was cool under her fingers and smelled faintly of the lemon oil the housekeeper had the maids use on Thursdays. If he tried to make her the story, he was not to step in front of her. He was to stand beside her. They would fall together or win together. He was not to rescue her. I will not rescue you. I will stand beside you. She turned to go. She was almost at the stairs when he said, quietly, Bethany. She stopped. She did not turn her head. She was not certain in that moment that she could. Thank you. She said he was welcome. She went up. She did not look back. She told herself she was not listening for his step on the stairs behind her. And because she was listening, she heard clearly the exact moment he sat down on the bottom step and put his head in his hands. The summer ball at Ashworth Hall opened at 9 on the 8th of July with 200 people in the long gallery, every candle in the house lit, and Lord Thorne standing under the central chandelier, with one hand on a pillar and the other on the arm of a young woman in white who was looking at the floor. Bethany came in on her uncle's arm. Her uncle did not know she had become his executioner. He had spent the morning congratulating himself on her quietness, which she took for repentance, and had made arrangements with Thorn to sign a preliminary note of intention by breakfast. He walked into the gallery with his chest out. Bethany, in a dark blue gown with no ornament at all and her hair dressed low on her neck, matched his pace and did not speak. Thorn saw her across the room. His eyes went to her face and stopped there. He had the face of a man who has never lost an argument in his life, because he has arranged never to be in one. "Miss Vance," he called, and his voice carried, because he had intended it to. "How unexpected." The room turned. The music at the far end of the gallery, a string quartet that had been going through a country air at medium volume, faltered on a downbeat, and then, tactfully, decided it was finished. The quiet that followed was the specific, breath-held quiet of 200 people agreeing at once that they did not wish to miss a syllable. Nordthorn. She disengaged her arm from her uncle's. Her uncle made a small, alarmed sound in the back of his throat, a noise she had heard before from a cat abruptly picked up by a child. She did not look at him. She had hoped to encounter him this evening, she said. Thorn took 3 steps forward, away from the chandelier and the girl in white. His boots and the parquet were the only sound in the long room. He had not looked to see her here at all, he said. He understood from her uncle that she had, what was the phrase? Removed herself from contention, she said she had. How interesting. She felt very sharply the weight of the gown on her hips and the precise cold pressure of the notebook she had sewn that afternoon into the lining of her left sleeve. I found I could not in good conscience pursue a man whose father had been the victim of repeated fraud. Nor, as it transpires, could I pursue a candidacy that had been arranged by a man who had helped to perpetrate that fraud. A ripple moved through the gallery, the way wind moves across a barley field. The girl in white lifted her eyes for the first time. They were pale grey and exhausted. Thorn smiled. It was a terrible smile. The smile of a man who has been caught out only once or twice in his life and has become accomplished at using the expression to buy a room's doubt. Young woman, you are in a state. I am not in a state. I am on a floor. Please do not confuse the two. Somebody laughed. It was cut off almost at once, a strangled bark from near the window, and Bethany did not look to see who. The back of her neck, she noticed, was very warm. The gown's high collar had become a line of heat against her skin. Thorn raised his voice to address the room. He understood, he said, that their young guest had been spending her evenings not at selection events, but in the stable yard. He was told, "By whom?" Thorn's head came back a fraction. She pressed him. Name him. If he was going to make an accusation, make it the way a gentleman did, with a source. Thorn's smile tightened. A vein at his temple, she saw, had begun to work. A servant, he imagined, would... She cut him off. A servant would not be here in this room tonight. He had heard gossip, hearsay. Let her save him time. She turned slightly, so that her voice carried also to the tall panes of the south window, because it was easier to speak to glass than to faces. I did kiss a man in the stable yard on my first night at Ashworth Hall. A sound went through the room, a single intake of breath repeated 200 times, soft and concerted as surf. She waited for it. She did not hurry. She had kissed him, she told them, because she had been told, all her life, that her consent was a commodity to be sold to the highest bidder, and she had wished to make that sale impossible. The man she had kissed had been grooming a horse. He had been in shirt sleeves. His hands had been dirty. He had told her his name was Caleb. She had kissed him. Her uncle made a sound like a kettle. She had not known at the time, she went on, steadily, that he had been, in point of fact, the Honourable Lord Ashworth. She had been told that Lord Ashworth was indisposed. 2 evenings later, she had been introduced to a Mr. Francis Carmichael, wearing a waistcoat that did not fit him, and she had, alone among the candidates present apparently, declined to marry him on the grounds that she did not wish to. She paused. She let the laughter come. It came, A nervous laughter, mostly from the young women, but laughter, and once it had started, it took longer than she had expected to finish. The actual Lord Ashworth, she told the room, had been permitting his cousin to stand in for him while he sought legal grounds to dissolve the contract his late father had signed, binding him to Lord Thorne's daughter. The girl in white had gone the color of chalk. Thorne's hand had left the pillar. Thorne warned her. She told him he would not warn her. He said she was ruining herself. I was ruined the night I walked into that stable yard, my lord. I am told it's stuck. The laughter was louder this time. I further informed the room, she said, and her voice, to her own great surprise, did not shake at all. Lord Fawn, she told them, had for at least 2 years been forging the signature of the late Duke of Ashworth on receipts and transfers of land that had enriched Lord Fawn at the expense of the estate. The forgeries, she said, were detectable because the late Duke had broken his right hand in October of the year before last, and could not write with it for 11 months. She had copies of the documents. The originals were in Lord Ashworth's possession. She turned, for the first time, toward her uncle. She saw him with a clarity she had never had before, the lace at his throat slightly stained, his mouth open, his eyes very small. He was holding the back of a chair with a grip that had whitened his knuckles. My uncle, Mr. Herbert Vance of Heronbrook, has been a party to this, in exchange for Lord Thorne's promise to advance him in society. I have copies of his correspondence as well. I will deliver both sets of evidence to Sir Henry Clifton at Middlebury Court on Monday morning. Her uncle sat down, on the floor. No one helped him up. Thorne took a step. His hand was at the breast of his coat, and for a moment Bethany thought, with a cold interior calm, that he might be reaching for something foolish. But it was only a handkerchief, which he drew out and did not use. He did not know what she had done, he hissed. She said she knew precisely what she had done. He demanded to know who had put her up to it, whether it had been Ashworth.
No one put me up to it.
She lifted her chin. I read the correspondence myself. I identified the discrepancies myself. My only assistance. And here, only here, she turned her head just enough to see that Caleb had stepped out of the crowd and was standing at her left shoulder, and she had not needed to look to know he was there, and the room noted it, and she let the room note it. My only assistance was in the copying, which was performed by Mr. Carmichael, who has a fine clerk's hand when he is not wearing other men's waistcoats. Her uncle spoke her name from the floor. She said no without looking. Caleb spoke for the first time. His voice was not loud. It did not need to be. Thorne, he said, would leave the house within the hour. He would leave without his daughter, who would remain as his mother's guest for as long as she required it. The contract between their houses was void on grounds of fraud. A copy of the evidence against him had been delivered to Sir Henry that evening. I recommend you go and pack. Thorne looked at him. He looked at Bethany. He looked at the two of them, side by side, not touching, and something behind his eyes gave up. He went. The room, after he went, did what rooms do. It buzzed. It did not clap. People did not yet know whether it was the kind of evening in which one clapped. Bethany's uncle was helped to his feet by 2 footmen and conducted, mercifully, to a small parlour, where in due course a doctor would arrive to take his pulse, and a magistrate, in the morning, to take the rest. The girl in white, Lord Thorne's daughter, Bethany had never learned her name, and now made a mental note to learn it, walked very slowly across the parquet and took Bethany's hand. She had never, the girl said, been more grateful for a scandal in her life. Bethany told her to go and change. The girl thanked her. She went. Bethany stood under the chandelier for a moment and did not know what to do with her own arms. Come outside, said Caleb beside her, before the rest of them arrived with their consolations. Yes. He led her through the side doors onto the south terrace. The air outside was warm, a summer night in full, heavy and sweet, the kind of air that made the stone under one's hand feel alive. The gardens below were lit by torches in staggered iron sconces. A peacock, somewhere past the box hedge, made the sound a peacock makes. She walked to the balustrade. She put her palms flat on the stone. She did not, for a moment, trust her legs. He asked if she was all right. She said no. He asked if she would be. She said yes. They stood a while. A moth came. A moth went. He told her he had been going to say something to her. She said don't. He said he had not been going to say the thing. He had been going to say something smaller. Then say it. She was, he told her, the bravest person he had ever met, including his mother, including his mother's father, who had been a general. And he would like, very much, to take her inside before he said anything else. Because he was not certain, he added, that he could be trusted to be careful with her for another hour. That, she said, is fair. May I walk you in? Yes. He held out his arm. She took it. They went back through the side doors, and the ball gathered around them like water closing over a stone. And that was the last she saw of him that night. She did not sleep. She did not expect to. At 5 a.m, because she had nowhere else to be, and because she had always known she would be there when the light came, she put on the breeches and the linen shirt the head groom's wife had kept for her, and she went down to the yard. Mallory was in his box, with his ears flat, because 5 was his preferred hour to be aggrieved. The tack room door was open. The lantern was unlit, because the light had already come. The saddle she had borrowed a dozen times was on its peg, and beside it was Caleb. Ashworth. Him. With a girth in his hands, and a look on his face that she had not seen before, and that she did not, at first, know how to read. She told him she had been going to ride Mallory out. He said he knew. The tack room smelled of neat's foot oil and wet leather, and the clean, dry mineral smell of hay that is cured in summer. A swallow flicked past the open door, and was gone before the eye could finish the thought. She said she thought she would go east, and not come back for breakfast. He said he knew that, too. He set the girth down on the tack trunk. The buckle clinked once against the iron lid, a small domestic sound that she had heard on and off for 12 mornings now. The black gelding, in his box, watched them both with the patient judgment of a horse who has seen many humans fail to manage their feelings in his yard. Bethany. No! He told her he had not said it yet, that he would not say it here if she would rather not. She stopped. The yard smelled, as it had smelled on the first evening, of cut grass and warm leather, and the flower she had never identified. A wren had started up in the hedge, small and repetitive and indifferent, and the sound of it ran under everything else like an undercurrent. Where would you say it? Here was honest, he said. He would say it here. She told him to say it honestly, not well. A breath. He had not moved. His hands, open at his sides, did not rise and did not close. I love you. She closed her eyes. Not the Lord. His voice was steady. His hands were at his sides, and they had not moved. Not the stable boy. The man who would be neither without you. He told her, then, the thing he had been rewriting in his head for 6 days, and had not been able to make shorter. He had been 2 men since he was 16, he said. One at dinner, and the other in this yard. And the night he had met her, he had understood, for the first time, that he had not been a single thing at any hour of his adult life. He had found in her the one honest person in a 5-county radius he wished to be a single thing for. He apologized for the length of the sentence. He had tried. It is long. It is. She opened her eyes. Before she answered, she told him she had conditions. She kept her own income. Whatever income was hers by law, she would manage it herself. She would not be obliged to account for it to anyone. Agreed, he said. The light in the yard had begun to pink the tops of the stable roof tiles, and Mallory, knowing the hour, gave a single, impatient stamp of a hind hoof against the boards of his box. She kept her own correspondence, she went on. It would not be opened. It would not be read. Not even by him. Agreed. She chose when they married. Not this month. Not because the county wanted a resolution. When she knew she could walk into the village church on a day of her own choosing and not feel she was being rescued from anything. Agreed. The yard had gone quiet, except for the small shift of the gelding's weight and the far-off low of a cow in a field beyond the orchard. She took one step closer to him, close enough to feel the warmth coming off his shirt, not close enough to touch. I want you to teach me to saddle this horse myself. I want to be able to leave the yard under my own power at any hour of any night, without waking a single groom if I have need of it. I want the option. He smiled. It was the small, careful half. And then it was a full smile. And the full smile was the one his father had never mastered, and his cousin had never inherited, and he alone in the family had possessed. She had never seen it before. She understood, as it opened, that she had been working toward it for a fortnight without knowing. Agreed, he said. Then yes. She stepped across the bricks. She put her hand flat against the front of his shirt, where the linen was warm, and his heart under it was working hard. I love you too, she said, into the hollow of his shoulder. It is terribly inconvenient. I had a plan to ride east. She could still ride east, he told her. With company, if she liked. Absolutely not. I require 2 hours alone in a field before I am fit for company. Then, he said, he would saddle Mallory for her, and stand and watch her go, and still be there when she came back. She made him promise. He promised. She went up on her toes, and she kissed him, and it was very like the first kiss, and not at all like it. Because this time neither of them was pretending to be somebody they had invented in order to survive an afternoon. And when she drew back, he was still not laughing, but he was near it. 2 hours, he said. 2 hours. She turned toward the tack wall and lifted the saddle she had already decided was hers. It was heavier than she had expected the first time she had carried it. It was no longer heavier than she had expected. He watched her, leaning one shoulder against the stall post, and did not reach to help. He told her to eat when she came back. She said, "Yes, my lord," and he told her not to, and she apologized. She rode out under a rising sun that laid the long shadow of the black gelding on the dew, and the dew was silver, and the wood at the far end of the meadow was full of pigeons clapping their wings, and she laughed twice on the way up the rise, and a rabbit went out of her way on the path. And when she came back at 7:30, he was in the yard with a cup of tea, and the head groom's wife's husband, and neither of them said anything at all as she came in. They only, between them, caught the reins. 6 months after that, on a bright, cold morning in January, a woman in breeches and a heavy wool coat stood in the Ashworth stable yard with a ledger open across her forearm and a pencil behind her ear. The yard was swept. A light frost had come down in the night and lay on the ridges of the cobblestones in little silver seams. Mallory was in the yard, unsaddled, being fussed over by a small child in a coat 3 sizes too large, and the child was laughing the unself-conscious laugh of a child who has been told, for the 100th time, that the horse likes her best. Lottie told her Mallory had put his nose in her ear. Bethany said that was a sign of very high favor, and the child was not to waste it. "Come here," she added. "Stand on the mounting block, heels down." The man behind her, also in a wool coat, also in gloves that did not quite close at the wrist, also laughing quietly under his breath, put his chin on her shoulder and read over her arm. He read out the Hutton tenancy. She told him it was in arrears by 6 weeks, partly the drainage. She had written to Ellen about the ditch and would visit on Thursday, alone, because she needed to be unaccompanied the first time. They would respect her more. Agreed. The child was on the mounting block. The black gelding, enormous and patient, lowered his nose to her ear again, and the child shrieked with joy, and Bethany closed her eyes and let the cold air and the smell of the yard and the warmth of the man at her back fill up the whole inside of her chest at once. She asked him if he remembered what this yard had smelled like the first night. Cut grass, he said, leather, manure, and that flower from over the kitchen wall. Honeysuckle, she told him. She had finally asked Mrs. Willoughby. Of course, he said. It was finished now, she added. It would come back, he answered. She knew. She turned her head. He was very close. His face, in the cold, had the faint redness across the cheekbones that it got when he had been out too early. She did not kiss him, because the child was watching, and the child was at a dangerous age for observation and repetition. But she pressed the back of her hand, once, against the line of his jaw, and he caught her fingers, and kept them there for the full second it took a small girl to slide off a mounting block into a warm stable yard. Lottie, he said, come and meet your new responsibility. Your aunt has decided you are old enough to learn to saddle a horse. Lottie's eyes went very wide. Bethany, at her side, ducked her head over the ledger to hide the smile. Really, Aunt Bethany? Really. In this exact stall, in fact. She closed the ledger. She tucked the pencil behind her other ear. The sun had come up over the roof of the east wing and was laying a warm hand on the top of her head. I kissed a stable boy here once, for a very good reason, and it turned out to be the best decision I ever made. So I have decided this is where we teach the children of this house to ride and to saddle and to stand their ground. Come along. Lottie came along. Behind them, the man who was both the lord and the stable boy, and, for the first time in either of his lives, neither, picked up a currycomb from the box by the post and followed his wife into the loose box and closed the half door behind them, and the three of them set about teaching a child how to be unafraid of something enormous. If this one made you smile, let me know in the comments. Who saw the twist coming, and who got caught off guard? And, if you like stories where a woman chooses the wrong man and turns out to be right anyway, make sure you're subscribed so you catch the next one.